I will never forget the moment I walked into that hospital room and saw my 5-year-old daughter Emma lying there with her arm in a cast. Her tiny face was streaked with tears, and when she looked up at me, she whispered the words that changed everything. "Daddy, the sheriff lady hurt me real bad. She twisted my arm until it snapped." That is when I realized that Sheriff Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her career. She had no idea that the father of the little girl she just brutalized was the deputy commissioner of the entire state law enforcement division. My name is David Chen, and until 3 months ago, I thought I was living the perfect life. Every morning, I would wake up in our small house on Maple Street, make breakfast for my daughter Emma, and drive her to Jefferson Elementary School before heading to my office an hour away in the state capital. Emma was everything to me. After her mother died in a car accident 2 years earlier, it became just the two of us against the world. She had these bright brown eyes that lit up whenever she talked about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. At 5 years old, she already knew the names of every animal at the local petting zoo. Our town of Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Population 8,000. Main Street had a diner, a hardware store, and a small courthouse that looked like it was built in the 1950s. People left their doors unlocked. Kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. It was exactly the kind of safe, quiet place I wanted to raise my daughter. What made our life even more perfect was that nobody in Millbrook knew what I really did for work. When neighbors asked, I just said I worked for the state government. I never mentioned that I was the Deputy Commissioner of Law Enforcement, responsible for overseeing police departments across 3 counties. I liked being just another single dad in a small town. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Emma bounced into the kitchen wearing her favorite purple dress and asked if she could bring her stuffed elephant to school for show and tell. I packed her lunch, braided her hair, and drove her to school while she chattered excitedly about her new teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Daddy, did you know that elephants can remember things for their whole entire lives?" Emma asked as I walked her to the school entrance. "Is that so?" I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Have a great day, sweetheart. I will pick you up at 3." She waved and skipped through the front doors. I had no idea that would be the last normal moment of our lives. I spent that morning in budget meetings, reviewing department reports, and approving overtime requests from various sheriff departments. It was routine work that I had been doing for 8 years. I took pride in making sure our state had the best trained and most ethical law enforcement officers possible. At 11:30 a.m. my phone rang. "Mr. Chen, this is Principal Martinez from Jefferson Elementary. I need you to come to the school immediately. There has been an incident with Emma." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. What kind of incident? Is she hurt? "Sir, I think it would be better if we discuss this in person. Emma is at Millbrook General Hospital right now." I do not remember the drive to the hospital. Everything became a blur of panic and terror. My hands were shaking as I ran through the emergency room doors and demanded to know where my daughter was. The nurse led me down a sterile white hallway to room 237. When I pushed open the door, my world collapsed. Emma was sitting on the hospital bed, her left arm wrapped in a bright pink cast from her wrist to her elbow. Tears were streaming down her face, and when she saw me, she reached out with her good arm. "Daddy, it hurts so bad," she whispered. I gathered her into my arms, careful not to bump her cast. "What happened, baby? Tell me what happened." Through her tears, Emma told me a story that made my blood run cold. Sheriff Karen Hartwell had come to the school that morning for a routine safety presentation. During the assembly, Emma had raised her hand to ask a question about police dogs. For some reason, this had irritated Sheriff Karen. "She told me to put my hand down and be quiet," Emma said. "But I just wanted to know if police dogs get scared sometimes. So I asked anyway." What happened next was unthinkable. According to Emma, Sheriff Karen had walked over to where she was sitting, grabbed her by the arm, and yanked her up from the floor. When Emma tried to pull away, Karen twisted her arm behind her back with such force that the bone snapped. "She said I was a disrespectful little brat who needed to learn some manners," Emma whispered. "And then she said if I told anyone, she would arrest you and put you in jail." The doctor came in a few minutes later and confirmed what I already feared. Emma had a compound fracture of her radius. The break was severe enough that she would need physical therapy for months. She might never regain full strength in that arm. "How does a 5-year-old get this kind of injury?" I asked the doctor. He looked uncomfortable. "Well, typically we see this from falls or car accidents, but the school said it happened during some kind of disciplinary action." Disciplinary action on a 5-year-old. I felt rage building in my chest like a wildfire. I called Principal Martinez and demanded to know exactly what had happened. His story was different from Emma's, and that difference told me everything I needed to know about what we were dealing with. "Mr. Chen, I want you to know that Sheriff Hartwell filed a report about the incident. She said Emma became aggressive and disruptive during her presentation. According to the report, Emma tried to hit her, and the sheriff was forced to restrain her for everyone's safety." I stared at my daughter, who was quietly coloring with her right hand while her left arm hung useless in its cast. This tiny, gentle girl who cried when we had to kill spiders in the house. This child who asked me to pull the car over last week so she could help an injured bird on the side of the road. "You are telling me that my 5-year-old daughter attacked a grown woman," I said. Principal Martinez cleared his throat. "That is what the official report says, Mr. Chen." That night, after Emma finally fell asleep, I sat in my home office and stared at the framed photo on my desk. It showed me shaking hands with the governor at my swearing-in ceremony as deputy commissioner. In that photo, I was smiling and proud of the oath I had taken to protect and serve the people of our state. Now I realized that one of the officers under my ultimate authority had just brutally assaulted my daughter and then lied about it in an official report. Sheriff Karen Hartwell had no idea who she was dealing with. But she was about to find out. 3 days later, Principal Martinez called and asked me to come to the school for a meeting. When I arrived, I found myself sitting across from Sheriff Karen Hartwell for the first time. She was exactly what I expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, with short gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. She wore her uniform like armor, with every button and badge polished to perfection. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. "Mr. Chen, I want you to know how sorry I am about what happened to Emma," she said. "But I think there might be some confusion about the events of that day." She opened a manila folder and pulled out several typed pages. "This is my official incident report. As you can see, your daughter became violent and disruptive during my presentation to the children. She attempted to strike me, and I was forced to use minimal force to restrain her." I read the report in silence. According to Sheriff Karen, Emma had stood up during the assembly and started yelling at her. When Karen tried to calm her down, Emma had swung her fist at Karen's face. The injury to Emma's arm happened when Karen gently guided her to a seated position. It was a complete fabrication. "Sheriff Hartwell, my daughter is 5 years old and weighs 42 pounds. Are you seriously telling me that you felt threatened enough by her to break her arm?" Karen's expression hardened. "Mr. Chen, I have been a law enforcement officer for 23 years. I know how to assess threats and respond appropriately. Your daughter was out of control, and frankly, her behavior suggests some serious problems at home." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. She was suggesting that I was a bad parent, that Emma's supposed aggression was somehow my fault. Principal Martinez, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "Mr. Chen, I was not in the assembly when this happened, but Mrs. Rodriguez and several other teachers witnessed the entire incident. They all confirmed Sheriff Hartwell's account." I looked at him carefully. Principal Martinez was a good man who had run Jefferson Elementary for 15 years, but right now he looked terrified. His hands were shaking slightly, and he kept glancing at Sheriff Karen like he was afraid she might turn on him next. "I would like to speak with Mrs. Rodriguez and the other teachers," I said. "That will not be necessary," Karen interrupted. "The incident has been thoroughly investigated and documented. The case is closed." "The case," I repeated. "What case?" Karen smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Well, Mr. Chen, technically your daughter did assault a police officer. I could press charges if I wanted to, but I am willing to let this go if we can all agree to move forward." The threat was crystal clear. "Keep your mouth shut, or I will have your 5-year-old daughter arrested for assault." I left that meeting knowing 3 things. First, Sheriff Karen Hartwell was a dangerous woman who was willing to hurt children to protect her reputation. Second, she had the entire school administration too scared to tell the truth. And third, she had no idea that she had just threatened the wrong person's child. That evening, I sat Emma down and asked her to tell me the story one more time. Her version never changed. She had simply asked a question about police dogs, and Sheriff Karen had exploded with rage. "Daddy, why did the sheriff lady say those mean things about me?" Emma asked. "Why did she hurt me?" I held my daughter close and made her a promise. "Some people use their power to hurt others instead of helping them. But I promise you, sweetheart, that she will never hurt you or anyone else ever again." I meant every word. The next morning, I called in sick to work and began my investigation. As deputy commissioner, I had access to databases and records that most people could never see. I started by pulling Sheriff Karen Hartwell's complete employment history. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Over the past 5 years, there had been 17 formal complaints filed against Sheriff Karen. 17. The complaints ranged from excessive force to racial profiling to verbal abuse. But somehow, every single complaint had been dismissed or withdrawn. I dug deeper. One complaint from 2 years ago caught my attention. A Hispanic man named Carlos Mendoza had accused Sheriff Karen of planting drugs in his car during a traffic stop. The complaint included a sworn statement from Mendoza's teenage son, who claimed he watched the whole thing happen from the passenger seat. But 3 weeks after filing the complaint, Mendoza had suddenly withdrawn it. According to the file, he said he had misunderstood what happened and apologized for wasting everyone's time. I found Mendoza's address and drove to his house that afternoon. He was working in his front yard when I pulled up, and I could see the fear in his eyes the moment I mentioned Sheriff Karen's name. "I do not want any trouble, sir," he said in heavily accented English. "I already told everyone that I made a mistake." "Mr. Mendoza, I am not here to cause you trouble. I just want to know what really happened that night." He looked around nervously, as if he expected Sheriff Karen to jump out from behind a tree. "You are not with the police." "No, sir. My daughter was hurt by Sheriff Karen, and I am trying to understand who she really is." Something in my voice must have convinced him, because Carlos Mendoza told me a story that broke my heart. He had been driving home from his job at the meat packing plant when Sheriff Karen pulled him over for speeding. She had ordered him out of the car and searched the vehicle while his 16-year-old son watched in terror. She went to her patrol car and came back with a small bag of marijuana, Mendoza said. She put it in my glove compartment and then found it during her search. My boy, he saw everything. But when I tried to tell people what happened, Sheriff Karen came to my house. What did she do? Mendoza's hands were shaking now. She told me that if I did not withdraw my complaint, she would have immigration services raid my workplace. She said she would make sure that half the people I work with got deported, and it would be my fault. So I withdrew the complaint. I spent the rest of that week tracking down other people who had complained about Sheriff Karen. I found similar stories everywhere I looked. A black teenager who had been beaten during a traffic stop, an elderly woman who had been verbally abused for asking questions about a parking ticket, a homeless veteran who had been arrested for sleeping in his car. In every case, the complaints had been withdrawn after Sheriff Karen or her deputies paid the victims a personal visit. She had built her reputation on a foundation of fear and intimidation. But the most disturbing discovery came when I accessed the internal affairs files from the county sheriff's department. There had been 3 separate investigations into Karen's conduct over the years. All 3 investigations had been conducted by Deputy Sheriff Mike Collins, who was Karen's second-in-command and longtime friend. Not surprisingly, all 3 investigations had concluded that the complaints were unfounded or malicious. The corruption went deeper than just one bad sheriff. She had an entire system protecting her. I started making copies of everything: personnel files, incident reports, witness statements, internal memos. I printed out hundreds of pages and stored them in a secure location outside my house. I also made digital copies and uploaded them to an encrypted cloud server. Sheriff Karen Hartwell thought she was untouchable. She had spent years building a wall of fear around herself, confident that nobody would ever have the courage or the power to challenge her. She was wrong on both counts. That night, I tucked Emma into bed and kissed her forehead. Her cast was covered with drawings and stickers from her friends at school. She was starting to smile again, but I could see the wariness in her eyes whenever strangers approached us in public. "Daddy, are you going to make sure the sheriff lady does not hurt anyone else?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart, I promise." As I turned off her light, I realized that this was no longer just about getting justice for Emma. It was about protecting every vulnerable person in our county from a predator who wore a badge. Over the next month, I carefully planned my strategy. As deputy commissioner, I knew that taking down a corrupt sheriff required more than just evidence. It required perfect timing, unshakable proof, and most importantly, the element of surprise. I started by building relationships with Sheriff Karen's other victims. I reached out to Carlos Mendoza, the teenager who had been beaten, the elderly woman, and 6 other people who had been abused by Karen over the years. At first, they were all terrified to talk to me. But when I explained that my own daughter had been hurt, and when I showed them my credentials as deputy commissioner, they began to trust me. We formed a secret group that met every Tuesday night in the basement of St. Mary's Church. Father Williams, the pastor, had agreed to let us use the space after I told him what we were trying to accomplish. He had his own story about Sheriff Karen intimidating him when he tried to help a parishioner who had been falsely arrested. "The Lord calls us to stand up for the innocent," Father Williams said, "even when it is dangerous." My plan was simple but risky. I was going to force Sheriff Karen to reveal her true nature in front of witnesses she could not intimidate. But to do that, I needed to make her angry, really angry. I started by filing a formal complaint about Emma's treatment, not through the local sheriff's department where it would disappear, but directly through the state oversight board. As deputy commissioner, I had the authority to trigger a state-level investigation. Sheriff Karen's response was swift and predictable. She called me at home on a Thursday evening, and I could hear the fury in her voice. "Mr. Chen, I thought we had an understanding about your daughter's situation." "We do," I said calmly. "I understand that you broke a 5-year-old girl's arm and then lied about it in an official report." "You are making a very big mistake," she said. "I have been protecting this community for over 2 decades. I have friends everywhere. Judges, prosecutors, state legislators. If you keep pushing this, you are going to find yourself in a world of trouble." "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" "It is a promise." The next day, I got a visit from Child Protective Services. Someone had called in an anonymous report claiming that I was neglecting Emma and that her injury was the result of abuse in our home. The social worker who came to interview us was apologetic but thorough. She asked Emma dozens of questions about how she was treated at home. Emma, bless her heart, told the truth. She explained that I took good care of her, that we read books together every night, and that her arm was hurt by the mean sheriff lady at school. The social worker closed the case within a week, but the message was clear. Sheriff Karen was escalating her campaign of intimidation. That was exactly what I was hoping for. I started showing up to public events where Sheriff Karen was present: town council meetings, school board sessions, community festivals. I never confronted her directly, but I made sure she saw me. I asked polite questions about police procedures and community safety. I brought Emma with me sometimes, her cast visible to everyone. Sheriff Karen grew more agitated with each encounter. During a town council meeting in late October, she finally lost her temper in front of 40 witnesses. "Mr. Chen, I am getting tired of your implications," she said, standing up from her seat. "If you have something to say about my department, then say it directly." "I just think the community deserves to know about the complaints that have been filed against your department," I replied calmly. "Transparency is important in law enforcement." "Those complaints were investigated and found to be without merit," she snapped. "Maybe if parents in this town did a better job raising their children, we would not have so many problems." The room fell silent. Everyone knew she was talking about Emma. Councilman Robert Hayes, who had been mayor for 12 years, cleared his throat. "Sheriff Hartwell, I think we should keep this discussion professional." Karen turned on him with blazing eyes. "Professional? This man has been harassing me and my department for weeks because he cannot accept that his daughter has behavioral problems. Maybe Child Services should take a closer look at what is happening in that house." The threat was made in front of 40 witnesses, including the president of the school board and 2 local newspaper reporters. I had been recording the meeting on my phone, and I could see other people doing the same. Sheriff Karen had just revealed her true character to the entire community leadership. More importantly, she had just made a public threat against a child in front of witnesses who would be very difficult to intimidate. As I left the meeting that night, I knew the trap was set. Now I just had to spring it. The annual Millbrook Harvest Festival was coming up in 2 weeks. It was the biggest community event of the year, with over 2,000 people attending from all over the county. Sheriff Karen always gave a speech at the festival about community safety and police cooperation. This year, her speech was going to be very different. November 15th was a crisp autumn day with clear blue skies. The Millbrook Harvest Festival was in full swing by the time I arrived at the town square with Emma. She was excited about the pumpkin carving contest and had been practicing her design for weeks. Her cast was finally off, but her left arm was still weak from months of physical therapy. I had spent the morning making final preparations. The evidence was organized in 3 binders, with copies stored in multiple locations. Carlos Mendoza and 4 other victims had agreed to attend the festival and speak publicly if needed. Father Williams was there with a group from his church. 2 reporters from the county newspaper were present, along with a journalist from the state capitol who had driven down after I called her with a tip about corruption in rural law enforcement. At 2:00 p.m., the community gathered in front of the temporary stage for Sheriff Karen's annual address. She looked confident as she approached the microphone, wearing her dress uniform with all her medals and commendations on display. Mayor Hayes introduced her as our dedicated sheriff who has kept Millbrook safe for over 2 decades. Sheriff Karen began her speech with the usual talking points about community partnerships and crime prevention. But I could see her scanning the crowd, and when her eyes found me, her expression hardened slightly. Public safety requires trust between law enforcement officers and the communities we serve, she said. That trust is built on honesty, integrity, and mutual respect. I stood up from my folding chair. Sheriff Hartwell, can I ask you a question about integrity? The crowd turned to look at me. Sheriff Karen's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Of course, Mr. Chen. On September 14th, you filed an official report claiming that my 5-year-old daughter attacked you during a school assembly. Is that an accurate statement? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Karen's face flushed red. Mr. Chen, this is not the appropriate time or place for this discussion. I think the community deserves to know the truth, I said, pulling out my first binder. Because I have 17 formal complaints that have been filed against you over the past 5 years. 17 complaints about excessive force, racial profiling, evidence tampering, and intimidation of witnesses. Those complaints were investigated and dismissed, Karen said through gritted teeth. Yes, they were dismissed by Deputy Sheriff Mike Collins, who happens to be your closest friend and second in command. Is that your idea of an impartial investigation? I opened the binder and began reading from the complaints. The crowd listened in stunned silence as I detailed case after case of abuse. Carlos Mendoza stood up and told his story about the planted drugs. The black teenager described his beating during a traffic stop. The elderly woman explained how she had been verbally abused for asking questions about a parking ticket. Sheriff Karen's composure was cracking. This is ridiculous, she shouted into the microphone. These are all lies from criminals and troublemakers who are trying to avoid responsibility for their actions. What about Emma? I asked. Is my 5-year-old daughter a criminal too? The crowd was completely silent now. Everyone was staring at Sheriff Karen, waiting for her answer. Your daughter was disruptive and aggressive, Karen said. She needed to be disciplined. She asked a question about police dogs, I replied, and you broke her arm for it. She attacked me, Karen screamed. The crowd gasped. Several people started talking at once. Sheriff Karen realized she had just admitted to using physical force against a child in front of 2,000 witnesses. That was when I played my final card. Sheriff Karen Hartwell, I said, pulling out my badge and credentials. My name is David Chen, and I am the Deputy Commissioner of the State Law Enforcement Division. You have just confessed to assault and battery against a minor in front of multiple witnesses. You are under arrest." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that crowd of 2,000 people. Sheriff Karen stared at my badge like she was seeing a ghost. "That is impossible," she whispered. "I have been investigating your department for the past 2 months," I continued. "I have documented evidence of corruption, excessive force, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and official misconduct. State troopers are already at your office executing search warrants." As if on cue, 3 unmarked cars pulled up to the edge of the town square. 6 state troopers in full uniform got out and walked toward the stage. Sheriff Karen's legs gave out, and she collapsed into the folding chair behind her. The woman who had terrorized our community for over 2 decades suddenly looked very small and very afraid. "You people do not understand," she said into the microphone, her voice cracking. "I have kept this town safe. I have done things that nobody else was willing to do. I deserve respect." But the crowd was already turning away. The spell was broken. After 20 years of fear and intimidation, the people of Millbrook could finally see Sheriff Karen Hartwell for what she really was: a bully with a badge. The arrest of Sheriff Karen Hartwell made headlines across the state. By the next morning, news vans were parked outside the courthouse, and reporters were interviewing anyone who would talk about life under Karen's rule. The state investigation moved quickly. Within a week, they had uncovered evidence of dozens of unreported incidents going back 15 years. Karen's office files contained falsified reports, planted evidence, and detailed records of the bribes and threats she had used to silence her victims. Deputy Sheriff Mike Collins was arrested 3 days after Karen. He had been her primary accomplice in covering up complaints and intimidating witnesses. The corruption had infected the entire sheriff's department like a cancer. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators searched Karen's home. They found a detailed journal where she had documented her crimes with disturbing pride. She had written about breaking Emma's arm like it was a professional accomplishment. The Chen girl learned an important lesson about respecting authority today. One entry read: "Sometimes children need to be reminded of their place." Reading those words made me physically sick. This woman had enjoyed hurting my daughter. The media attention brought forward dozens of additional victims who had been too afraid to speak up before. A pattern emerged of systematic abuse targeting the most vulnerable members of our community: minorities, immigrants, children, the elderly, and anyone who dared to question Karen's authority. The trial began in February. I testified on the first day, describing the moment I found Emma in the hospital and the cover-up that followed. Emma was too young to testify in court, but the prosecution played a video of her interview with a child psychologist. Even hardened courtroom veterans had tears in their eyes as they listened to my 5-year-old daughter describe her attack. Karen's defense attorney tried to argue that she was just a dedicated officer who had made some mistakes under pressure. But the evidence was overwhelming. 17 victims testified about their experiences with Karen's abuse. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Karen to 12 years in state prison. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she turned and looked directly at me. "You have no idea what you have done," she said. "This town needed someone strong enough to keep order. Without me, everything will fall apart." But she was wrong. In the months that followed, Millbrook began to heal. The new sheriff, Maria Santos, was a respected officer from the state police who had volunteered to help rebuild the department. She implemented new policies for accountability and transparency. She hired officers who actually wanted to serve the community instead of controlling it. The real healing came from the victims themselves. Carlos Mendoza started attending town council meetings and became an advocate for immigrant rights. The teenager who had been beaten became a youth leader in his church. The elderly woman who had been abused started a support group for other victims of police misconduct. Emma's recovery was slower. She still flinched sometimes when she saw police officers, and her left arm never regained full strength. But gradually, her natural curiosity and joy began to return. She started asking questions again, including questions about police work and justice. "Daddy, why did the sheriff lady hurt people?" she asked one evening as I was reading her a bedtime story. "Some people think that having power means they can do whatever they want," I explained. "But real power comes from helping others and making sure everyone is treated fairly." "Is that why you stopped her?" "Yes, sweetheart, that is exactly why." The civil lawsuits took 2 years to resolve. The county paid out over $3 million to Karen's victims, money that came from taxpayers who had unknowingly supported her reign of terror. It was an expensive lesson about the cost of allowing corruption to flourish unchecked. I returned to my job as deputy commissioner with a new understanding of how power can corrupt even the institutions designed to protect people. I implemented new oversight procedures and mandatory training programs on ethics and accountability. I made sure that no other Sheriff Karen Hartwell would ever have the opportunity to terrorize innocent people. But the most important change was personal. I realized that sometimes the greatest act of public service is being willing to use your power to protect those who cannot protect themselves, even when it is dangerous, even when it is difficult, even when it means risking everything you have worked for. Especially then. 2 years have passed since Sheriff Karen Hartwell was sent to prison. Emma is 7 now, and she has started second grade with Mrs. Patterson, who makes sure all her students feel safe and respected. Emma's left arm is fully healed, though she still has a small scar where the bone broke. She calls it her bravery mark. The changes in Millbrook have been remarkable. Sheriff Santos has transformed the police department into something the community can actually trust. Officers now wear body cameras, complaints are investigated by an independent board, and there is regular training on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. Most importantly, people are no longer afraid to speak up when they see injustice. The culture of fear that Karen had created has been replaced by a culture of accountability. Last month, Emma asked if she could attend the town council meeting with me. She wanted to see how local government worked, and she was curious about the democratic process. As we sat in the same room where I had first publicly confronted Sheriff Karen 2 years earlier, Emma raised her hand during the public comment period. "My name is Emma Chen," she said into the microphone, her voice clear and confident. "I just wanted to thank everyone for making our town a safer place for kids like me." The room erupted in applause. Mayor Hayes had tears in his eyes as he thanked Emma for her courage. After the meeting, Carlos Mendoza approached us. He had been elected to the town council the previous November and was working on new policies to protect immigrant families from harassment. "Your daughter is very brave," he told me, "just like her father." "We were all brave," I replied. "We just needed someone to show us that it was possible to fight back." The ripple effects of our fight against corruption have spread far beyond Millbrook. The state legislature passed new laws requiring independent oversight of sheriff departments. Police training programs now include mandatory courses on ethics and community relations. Most importantly, There are now clear channels for reporting misconduct that cannot be suppressed by local officials. I have spoken at conferences across the country about the importance of accountability in law enforcement, but I always end my presentations with the same message. Real change happens when ordinary people find the courage to stand up for what is right. Emma often comes with me to these speaking events. She likes to meet other children who have been affected by police misconduct, and she always tells them the same thing her father told her. Bad people can only hurt you if good people do nothing to stop them. Sheriff Karen Hartwell will be eligible for parole in 8 more years. I hope she uses that time to reflect on the damage she caused and the lives she destroyed. But mostly, I hope she never has the opportunity to wear a badge or carry a gun again. As for Emma and me, we are building a new life based on truth, justice, and the belief that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Emma still wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up, but she has also expressed interest in becoming a lawyer or a police officer. "I want to help people the right way," she told me recently, "like you did when you stopped the mean sheriff lady." That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at me with those bright brown eyes that had seen too much darkness for someone so young. "Daddy, do you think there are other kids out there who need help like I did?" "Probably," I said. "Then we should help them too." "Yes, sweetheart, we should." Because that is what justice really means. It means being willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. It means using whatever power you have to protect the innocent. And it means never, ever giving up. Even when the fight seems impossible. Even when the odds are against you. Even when you are just one person standing up to a system that seems too powerful to change. Sometimes one person is enough.